समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
From its orbit in the infinite darkness of outer space, more than 100,000 kilometers above the Earth, the spy satellite Vela 6911 recorded two tiny bursts of light on Prince Edward Islands in the remote southern Indian Ocean, halfway between Africa and Antarctica. Logged as Event 747, the flashes of light were soon confirmed to have been released in a low-yield nuclear test by the sensitive hydroacoustic data acquisition system at Accession Island. Later, more evidence emerged from the thyroid glands of Australian sheep, which grazed along the path of the radioactive plume that had drifted east across the Indian Ocean. A new nuclear power had been born on the 22nd of September 1979. Hi, and welcome to the Print Explorer. I'm guessing some of you wondered where I disappeared to. I was working on a research project, and which is eventually going to become a book, and I've been away in the United States. And as I was doing that, the world lurched into potentially a war that can reshape the region and the Middle East. Israeli and American combat jets and missiles have been hitting sites across Iran, seeking to obliterate both its nuclear program and the regime itself. Today, I'll be looking at how the world got here. And the story of that Israeli nuclear is key to understanding what's going on. The world had in 1979 become a very dangerous place. The Iranian Revolution had took place in February, costing Israel one of its most trusted partners, the Shah of Iran. Tensions between the Cold War adversaries were starting to spike. Fearing disclosure of the Israeli nuclear test might jeopardize the peace process he had so painstakingly crafted in the Middle East, President Jimmy Carter asked a panel of experts to provide him with a list of other reasons that might conceivably explain Event 747. Even though he was soon equipped with excellent excuses, the president did not hide the truth from himself. We have a growing belief among our scientists that the Israelis did indeed conduct a nuclear test explosion in the ocean near the southern end of Africa. President Carter recorded in his private diary. And that was it. Except, of course, it wasn't. Let's start, as it were, with the prequel to this incredible story. Following the end of the Second World War, the major powers all scrambled to acquire the nuclear weapons the United States had unleashed to terrifying effect in 1945. The Soviet Union, helped by its extensive nuclear espionage network, had long known the United States was working to produce the bomb, which is why when he was told about it by the United States, Stalin didn't seem very impressed. He'd known for years. 4 years after that first test, in September 1949, the Soviet Union tested its own bomb years ahead of what had been expected. The United Kingdom followed in 1952, France in 1960, and China in 1964. Technically, the United Kingdom, France, and China all had the protection of a superpower, the first two from America and the latter from the Soviet Union. But their leaders realized they could not be 100% sure either the United States or the Soviet Union would protect them when push came to shove. Put it in a simpler way, would America really be willing to give up Washington or New York for London? The nuclear bomb was, everyone understood, quite different to all other kinds of weapons human beings had ever known. Their destructive power quite literally rendered the concept of victory in war completely irrelevant. Yes, the Soviets or the Americans might be able to crush the other side in a war, but only at the cost of their own complete and assured annihilation. And which sane ruler would risk that, right? And exactly because of this, a second wave of nation states began seeking the nuclear bomb too. Israel, of course, because it was surrounded by hostile states which it had been to war since the moment it came into existence. But also India, because of the Chinese tests, and Pakistan, which knew that India was beginning its project, and apartheid South Africa, which had actually produced 6 weapons by the early 1980s. There were others like South Korea and Brazil, which mastered many of the technologies needed to produce nuclear weapon at short notice, though they never actually put all these components together. Like Israel, Iran was one of these second-generation nuclear powers. The Emperor of Iran, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, had acquired a small research reactor from the United States in 1967, capable of producing 5 megawatts of electricity. Later, in the 1970s, I'll repeat that, sorry. Later, in the early 1970s, the Shah announced an ambitious plan to construct 23 nuclear reactors as part of his country's search for a post-petroleum future. The American-supplied nuclear research reactor laid the foundations for Iran's nuclear program. The Tehran research reactor was a light water reactor supplied in 1967, complete with hot cells for the production of medical isotopes and some 5.5 kilograms of highly enriched uranium fuel. The reactor, housed at the Tehran Nuclear Research Center, was capable of producing up to 600 grams of plutonium annually. In 1987, long after the revolution, Argentina's Applied Research Institute converted the reactor to run on low-enriched uranium instead of high-enriched uranium. Argentina subsequently supplied Iran with 115.8 kilograms of light-enriched uranium under the safeguards mandated by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Between 1988 and 1992, Iran conducted undeclared reprocessing experiments with fuel pellets, which were irradiated in the Tehran research reactor. From the outset, though, long before the revolution, it was clear that the prospect of acquiring nuclear weapons technology was at least part of the reason why the Shah of Iran was so interested in reactors. In 1974, just after India's first nuclear test, which was conducted ostensibly for peaceful purposes like excavations to build dam reservoirs and so on, the Shah was reported to have made his desire for a bomb public. Later, the Shah denied having said anything of the kind, but we know from declassified documents that American diplomats believed he was signaling that Iran, I quote, could not stand by idly if other nations like Israel or Egypt should go nuclear. The United States had worries of its own to do with the prospect of nuclear proliferation. From the beginning, the United States had worried that Iran might enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels. To prevent this, it floated various suggestions, including the purchase of enriched uranium from a reactor it invested in but was in another country, or setting up an offshore facility with Pakistan, again to supply this enriched uranium. In 2009, the Tehran research reactor was expected to run out of fuel within the following few years. After the failure of the proposed light-enriched uranium fuel exchange deal between Iran on the one hand and Russia and France on the other, Iran declared it had started enriching uranium to up to 20% in order to manufacture fuel pellets from the Tehran research reactor. In February 2012, Iran loaded the first batch of indigenously produced fuel rods into the Tehran research reactor. Like almost every other country, especially Pakistan, Iran did whatever it needed to do to steal technology, acquire it, mask the real purpose of importing various components, tap the black market. It even purchased centrifuge designs to enrich uranium from Pakistan. Ever since the release of a 3-part Israeli television documentary in 2024, the country's notoriously secret nuclear program has had a public airing. The documentary, The Atom and Me, centers around interviews with Benjamin Bloomberg, the head of the Israeli Scientific Intelligence Agency responsible for the nuclear mission. Lakam, Bloomberg's agency, was so secretive that its work was often withheld from Israel's external intelligence service, Mossad. The interviews were recorded in 2018 with a promise not to air them until Bloomberg's death. Large parts of the story, though, were known outside Israel ever since the publication of historian Avner Cohen's superb book on the country's nuclear program. Even though Iran joined the United States Atoms for Peace civilian nuclear technology initiative in 1955, leading to a small reactor being established at Nahal Sorek in 1960, the country's leaders soon realized that the framework was not of any help in developing a nuclear weapon, which is what they really wanted. Israel's leaders now turned to France. Like Israel, France believed that it needed its own nuclear weapon to ensure survival in a dangerous world. French assistance, including access for Israeli scientists to nuclear research institutions, laid the foundations for the atomic weapons program by the mid-1950s. French Prime Minister Guy Molot, guilty of having drawn Israel into the Suez Crisis in 1956, which ended up undermining the fledgling state's relationship with both the United States and the Soviet Union, emotionally declared, "I owe them the bomb. I owe it to them." The French commitment to Israel's nuclear weapons program became explicit from the outset of work on the Dimona nuclear reactor in 1958. The plans included all the technological components required for a plutonium-based nuclear weapon, including underground facilities to extract plutonium from spent uranium. Why a plutonium weapon? Well, a weapon made from plutonium was far lighter than a weapon that was made up of enriched uranium, and therefore could deliver more devastating impact with less problems of transporting it to target on a plane or in a missile. From at least 1960, declassified documents reveal that the United States was aware that the Dimona reactor was designed not for the production of energy, but for making weapons-grade plutonium. Large amounts of equipment Israel could not legitimately acquire. It simply stole, Victor Gilinski and Leonard Weiss have recorded, just like other states in the same situation like Pakistan and North Korea. In 1968, weapons production quantities of uranium-235 were stolen from a facility in Pennsylvania, not far from where I am now. This operation appears to have involved some of the same Mossad operatives who kidnapped the Nazi leader Adolf Eichmann from Argentina in a much revered intelligence operation. The spy, arms dealer, and film producer Arnold Milchan, similarly, was involved in the theft of high-speed switches needed to trigger the nuclear explosion. The story soon expanded to include what, in retrospect, is a profoundly disturbing relationship Israel forged with apartheid-era South Africa, with Israel using the services of the former brigadier and mercenary Jonathan Blau to acquire uranium. In return, Israel helped South Africa with conventional military know-how, as well as assistance in its own nuclear weapons. From declassified documents finally revealed in 2010, it's clear Israel was selling technology that South Africa used to intimidate its black African neighbors. In one letter dated 11 November 1974, then Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres wrote that Israel and the South African apartheid government shared a, I quote, common hatred of injustice. Yes, that's quite an incredible statement in retrospect. But it also tells us something important about nation states. All nation states try to maximize the power they have and are usually willing to make what are frankly sordid compromises with principle to expand and secure themselves. The Israelis faced a genuine threat from their neighborhood and were trying to acquire the ultimate insurance that their state would never be overwhelmed by their far larger Arab neighbors. The problem is, when one bomb comes into a neighborhood, all the adversaries will seek the same thing. Iran may not have faced a threat from Israel at that point, but it knew it had a problem. In the 1950s, the United Kingdom had even drawn up plans to combat an invasion of northern Iran by the Soviet Union by staging massive military nuclear bombings in northern Iran, which would have obliterated the local population. Iran had suffered from colonialism. And Iran also wanted to be sure that it had the tools to hold out no matter what. From at least 1969, America knew that Israel had become a nuclear power, even if it was an undisclosed one. In one memo, then National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger made clear that Tel Aviv had at least a dozen surface-to-surface French-made missiles capable of delivering weapons as part of an arsenal of about 30 or 40 warheads. This was in the face of past assurances Israel had given the United States. The previous year, Kissinger noted, then Ambassador and later Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin had promised Israel would not be, I quote, the first to introduce nuclear weapons in the Middle East. It's obviously lying. Following protracted discussions at the White House on 26 September 1969, President Richard Nixon and Prime Minister Golda Meir arrived at a landmark secret deal. The United States would act as if Israel had no nuclear bombs. That would allow it to continue providing Israel military assistance. But Israel had to keep its bombs a secret. If the bomb came out from under the bed, there would be serious consequences. Israeli leaders knew, though, that actual deterrence could only be established when both their friends and adversaries knew that Israel's nuclear bombs actually worked. Hence the tests on Prince Edward Island and the willful cover that President Jimmy Carter engaged in. The nuclear program in Iran, meanwhile, also kept ticking forwards, even after the Shah was dethroned. The new regime in Tehran soon found itself being subjected to missile and chemical weapon strikes by the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein's government. The United States, enraged by its embassy personnel having been taken hostage by Iranian students, encouraged Iraq. As the world stood by, Iran concluded that it needed to develop the tools to make a nuclear weapon. The Iranians, though, weren't sure they would ever use one. It seems their intention was to have the wherewithal to assemble a device, but use that to secure the lifting of sanctions that were imposed after the revolution in Iran. Last year's attack on Iran made something clear, which everyone had known. It's really difficult to bomb a nuclear project into annihilation. That's because not only is nuclear infrastructure very well protected, a lot of Iran stuff is built deep underground, but also because once you develop the expertise and knowledge of how to do something, it becomes easier to do it again. Iran now has a very substantial nuclear infrastructure. The fuel enrichment power plant and pilot fuel enrichment plant in Natanz, the Fordo fuel enrichment plant near the city of Qom, centrifuge research and development facilities in Tehran and in Isfahan. And Iran has also grown a pretty large industrial base to support these activities, as well as the missile program, which will carry a future warhead to its target. Even if the regime is dethroned, its successor will inherit these resources and likely face the same strategic compulsions which make the pursuit of nuclear weapons attractive to Tehran. There's nothing irrational about seeking nuclear weapons. And as long as Iran faces geopolitical threats from powerful neighbors, like Saudi Arabia, for example, or like Israel or whatever, they'd like to have the bomb. Last year, when negotiators from the United States and Iran met in Oman's capital, Muscat, for mediated negotiations on the nuclear program, the idea was that American negotiators would slowly understand the existential anxieties that drove the country. Those existential anxieties were identical to those which drove the programs of India or Pakistan or anywhere else. Iran feared that shorn of its missiles and nuclear capabilities, it could be eaten up by its richer Arab neighbors or by America. The challenge for President Trump and the Iranian negotiators was therefore to craft some kind of deal they could both live with. Guarantees that would address the concerns of Israel, which feared it might be attacked with these missiles and bombs, but also Iran's anxieties of threats to itself. Last year, the United States Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, revealed that Trump had written to Iran's government saying, I quote, "We should talk. We should clear up the misconceptions. We should create a verification program so that nobody worries about weaponization of your nuclear material. That's exactly what President Barack Obama had sought to do in 2015 through a long dialogue process involving Iran, Germany, and uh, the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, which is the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, and France. Trump, though, resigned from that agreement, citing Iranian work on ballistic missiles as a continuing threat to Israel. Last year's talks, though, saw Trump beginning to bomb Iran, even as the two sides were discussing a deal in Oman. By the account of Oman's foreign minister, the mediator of the talks this time, a deal was in sight when Trump decided to authorize the attacks. In the talks in Muscat, Oman's foreign minister has said Iran had agreed to hand over a large part of its enriched uranium stockpile in return for lower enriched uranium being delivered for its reactors. What Iran wasn't willing to compromise on, though, was giving up the capacity to completely develop enriched fuel. American negotiators in Oman are believed to have been very frustrated when their offer of free enriched uranium was rejected by the Iranians. They seem to have missed that this was a very understandable thing. After all, if something is given free, it can also be turned off. And Iranians weren't willing to take the chance that one fine day they might be squeezed and they might find themselves without any nuclear fuel. Similarly, they weren't willing to give up their ballistic missiles for the obvious reason that till they felt themselves completely secure as a state, they'd be handing over that one truly defensive means. Similarly, Israel had every good reason to be terrified of these Iranian missiles because, as we've seen, they had the capacity to paralyze regional countries, forcing them into investing enormous amounts of money in very expensive interceptor missile systems, which cost multiples of the cost of the ballistic missiles Iran is firing at them. So what do you do in a situation like this? Is there some kind of middle ground that keeps both sides happy? Well, one heterodox answer is that maybe nations should just be allowed to keep nuclear weapons. The nuclear theorist Kenneth Waltz, writing in 1981, suggested that when it came to nuclear weapons, and I quote, more may be better. That very nature and destructive potential, Waltz argued, meant that the measured spread of nuclear weapons is more to be welcomed than to feared. This, he went on, because in, and I quote, a conventional world, deterrent threats are ineffective because the damage threatened is distant, limited, and problematic. That is, you can't be sure what your artillery and tanks will do, and maybe it's not that much. He goes on, nuclear weapons make military miscalculations difficult and politically pertinent prediction easy. Put simply, Waltz ended, I quote, in a conventional world, one is uncertain about winning or losing. In a nuclear world, there's no question of winning or losing. One is uncertain only about surviving or being annihilated. Iran's regime, you could argue, no more seeks annihilation than does Israel or North Korea or Pakistan or India or Russia or China or the United States or Britain or France. Some of the premises of the debate that was used to argue against nuclear proliferation was that these second wave states, particularly the non-white countries that acquired weapons, were somehow deficient or irresponsible in their use of this technology and couldn't be trusted to have it. Experience has shown us that actually these countries have proved just as responsible as Western countries in using this technology. And you can see this even in the India-Pakistan relationship, where despite having had many wars since the second round of nuclear tests in 1999, both countries have stopped shy of using a bomb. The second possibility is that Iran might be helped to give up nuclear weapons by providing credible security guarantees. And that's more difficult. It will mean that the United States has to genuinely speak to Iranian concerns and persuade Israel too to come on board. Can it do that? It's hard to say. Building trust is a very difficult and complicated thing. What we do know is that bombing Iran will at most delay the path to the acquisition of a nuclear weapon by some time. Even destroying Iran completely and bringing down its regime might not achieve a secure outcome. We saw in Iraq that the disintegration of the Iraqi state as a result of invasion and regime change there actually became much, much more dangerous as the state fell apart and all kinds of chaotic forces developed leading up to the birth of the Islamic State. That's something it's no one's interest to see emerge. And the unity of the Iranian state has, for better or worse, helped ensure stability or some degree of stability in this volatile region. The temptation for powerful nations to reach for their coercive resources whenever they're confronted with an intractable problem is very, very deep. Repeatedly, we've learned from Afghanistan, the Soviet Union's graveyard, from conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have seen that you cannot count on coercion or force giving you reliable results. Ultimately, the only stable solution is to find a political middle ground all the actors can live with. Very sadly, American diplomacy, and for that matter, Iran's elite, just don't seem to have the patience and breadth of vision ending this crisis needs. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Print Explorer.